Ready? Good. Okay, let's call the roll. Dick Benka,
Here.
Ruth Ellen Fitch,
Here.
Jeff Rudolph, Sergio Modigliani, Janet Gelbert,
Here.
Sadaf Kazmi,
Here.
Marina Brega,
Here.
John Doggart.
Here.
Okay, so we have a quorum of members, voting members. John Van Scoyac,
Here.
Jesse Hefter, Cliff Brown.
Here.
Okay, so let's get going. First item, approving minutes for February 11, 2026 and February 18, 2026. Any corrections? I have one, but no. Okay, in the futures for the when we list voting on items in our subcommittees as well as this committee, although I and other elected officials don't vote, we still are members of the committee. And I think it's important to put us down as abstaining as opposed to not listing us. Does anyone disagree with that? Okay. So with that correction to the minutes, I move approval of the minutes for February 11, 2026 and February 18, 2026.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, please.
Aye.
I think we go by roll call, right?
Yes. Sorry.
Okay, Dick Benka,
Aye.
Ruth Ellen Fitch,
Yes.
Jeff Rudolph. Oh, he's not here. Sergio's not here. Janet Gelbart,
Yes.
Sadaf Kazmi,
Yes.
Maria Nebrega,
Abstain.
John Doggart.
Yes.
Let's see. Okay, and chair votes abstain. Is Cliff here?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Cliff.
Well, John Doggett is here, so I would defer to him.
Oh, that's right. Sorry. Okay, so
Can
those
I
are,
ask a question? Is anyone else having a hard time getting onto the town website and the agenda center? For me, it's just not loading over and over again.
I'm on. I'm on.
So it's a me problem. Okay, thank you.
okay, next item on the agenda is school budget and fiscal year 27 through 29 override target. This is a discussion of public schools 2027 to 29 budget projections and potential override ask, which is in our packet. Who's gonna lead this discussion?
We have the superintendent on.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, I didn't see. Okay, Bella? So the floor is all yours.
Is the floor all mine?
Yep.
Okay. So I think all of you are aware of the presentation that was made on the 5th to school committee. We are projecting an increase for FY27 of a little over 8.1 million. Since that time, we received the projected allocation from the town for funding for FY27 of 1.74 million. So that brought our gap down to 6.35. So that is the gap that was presented, or where it stands right now, between the time we presented and before school committee meets tomorrow night. We also did a multi-year projection across the 3 years. And so that amount over 3 years was 19.1. But with the allocation, it's a little less than that. In preparation for tomorrow night, the team, principals and senior leadership team have been working on impact statements for what would happen if the budget wasn't fully funded for next year. And so that will be presented tomorrow night. We are also expecting to present a refinement of the projected increase of 8.1 million for next year to bring it down a little further. But even if we bring it down further as we anticipated, it's still a significant projection of increases for the school budget over next year and the 2 years after. So the total would still be between 18 and $19 million. And where we are right now for the projection for FY27 already incorporates a net reduction of 19.7 FTEs. Prior to this year, there have been a reduction of 20 FTEs since the last override. So the budget as it stands in the proposed state, the recommended state, already reflects almost a reduction of 40 FTEs since the last override. I know that it's a big number over the last 2 years, but over the next 3 years, but over the last 3 years, each of those years, the budget has increased between 6 and 7 million each of the annual years. And again, we are looking at reduced staffing and expenses for the year coming forward. I do think it's fair to present that the new leadership team that we've looked at all our lines and have done our best to reorganize functions, look for efficiencies, restore what is critical, but also in order to maintain the very solid programming that's offered to the students of the town, and also at a level that I think the community expects to be provided for those students. Comprehensive services, around 40% of our students receive some sort of general support, whether through IEPs or whether through other general interventions. We offer solid programming for students with different interests around all academic areas and co-curricular. I don't believe that what we offer is way over and above. I think it's a solid, really good program, and that students have opportunities to achieve excellence, whoever they might be in the district. In my observation in visiting the schools and the high school, I think that the culture that is cultivated here provides a really supportive environment for students to learn freely and to learn fully. All said that I think that what you have here is a high quality environment for learning and programming. I don't feel that in the next few years, as we look at our projections, that they are way and over above what has happened over the last 3 years. That what we're presenting is a real cost of the programs that we offer. Again, we're presenting a budget that already reflects 40 FTE reductions and expense reductions and refinement since the last override. We will fine tune some more tomorrow night. And we are preparing to share the impact statements tomorrow. Conversations have already been completed with some of our union leadership and some of our our other leadership levels about what those impacts are going to be. I'm in the middle of drafting a note for all staff to let them know that these conversations are being had. The list will not be public till tomorrow night when we present to school committee. The list is known at the senior level and will be shared with some of the senior, sorry, not senior, some of the school committee members that are working most directly with us on building the budget. At this point, I want to know what else would be helpful for you to know.
So any response to that?
Yeah, I have a question about the about fiscal 28 and 29. I know Superintendent Wong, you mentioned the 1.7 million. That was the latest number in terms of the year-over-year allocation from a revenue point of view to the schools, which was down from 1.9, but it seems like the 1.74 is the latest number we have. So thank you for that clarification. What about the numbers for 28 and 29? And I know in the out years it's more complicated. It's a bit of a moving target. As time progresses, you get better information. In the budget that you had shared in January, towards the end of January, the number for incremental year-over-year dollars was zeroed out. And I assume that was a placeholder until we got additional information. And so I'd like to understand what is the latest in terms of fiscal 28 and 29, because based on the numbers you summarized, it sounds like, based on what I know of the numbers, that the assumption is that those numbers are still zero.
So the update we got over, not this last weekend, but the weekend before, that's when we learned that the allocation for next year would be the 1.7 for, and then the allocation for FY 28 at the time, it's like 5,000. And then the allocation for FY 29 was a negative number, and I'm so sorry. I don't have it at my fingertips. I don't know if Mariah remembers.
Not 500,000 in the red. Yeah.
Okay, so it's a negative number.
Okay, thank you.
That's a non-override.
Correct.
Yeah, that's a non-override outlook. If an override were to pass, my understanding is that the allocation would improve, but not hugely. And Chaz, you can.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
if the override were to pass, right now,
Yeah.
where we're at, right, is the schools are roughly between 18 and 20 million. And the town is at 5.3. That will cause a shift in the town school split, right? And we did that last time because the schools received slightly more than 60-40 in the 2023 override. And so what we did to account for that is we put a line in the town school split where we just said override adjustments. And that basically meant, any money, there was extra money that didn't flow through the split that went directly to the schools in that case, because the override had expressly said the schools will get X amount of dollars over the course of these 3 years. In order to make that happen, the split was adjusted to make that functional. Yeah, that's how it would work in practice, is that when we put an override question on the ballot, we traditionally said, do you agree to do this? And then we say X is for general government and X is for the schools, Y is for the schools. And then we hold to that. So the schools will get what they asked for. And that results in number being what it is.
In the impact of a non-override scenario, I remind the group that 2 years ago, the school committee eliminated the K-5 world language program. So when we look at the pre-K through 8, and as you know, for the proposed budget, we already right-sized the sections. So we already included some reductions to staffing. As we look at a pre-K through 8 impact, there's not really many good choices. Actually, they're really quite bad choices in programs that we would look at reducing in order to save the section size. If we don't eliminate program, then it means our class section sizes go up. And so we should be able to present that with some clarity tomorrow evening. High school similarly would have to be some reduction in the class sizes at the high school across core program and some elimination of supports.
Okay. So one of the things that I think we haven't talked about yet within this group is really what the override would look like, right? So Superintendent Wong just shared that we're between 18 and 19 million on the school side, and the 5.3 I think hasn't changed from the town side. But I know there's been a lot of discussions that the schools have been having. Obviously, I'm not aware of the details of those discussions. I'm hearing from other people in town that there's a push to get it to an override number that has a 1 in front of it as opposed to a 2 in front of it. And this is kind of hearsay from different people who I speak with within town. When are we going to have an opportunity to have a conversation about what that might look like? Is that accurate? Is that an accurate understanding? Again, hearsay from my perspective. But is there a uh, is that an accurate representation of the discussions that are happening? Number one. And number two, when will we have a conversation about how we would assemble those numbers? Because I think that's something that we need to pressure test. So for example, just given the size of the roughly 25 million, and the concerns that everybody has, I think about that number passing. One of the things that I wanted to continue to push on is, would you continue to think about whether you would create tiers so it's not an all or nothing situation? I know that the sentiment originally was not to do that. I understand why, but I do think that if this is the number we're landing on, that is something that I want to resurface. The other thing I'd like to resurface is the 1-year override question, which I think there's a lot of downsides to that as well, but I do think it warrants a discussion again. I think we punted on it a couple of weeks ago, but I think we need to resurface it. And in order to do that, I think we need to look at what is the direction that the select board and between Chaz and Superintendent Wong, you guys are leaning in terms of how this will be assembled and come together. I think it's a gap in the conversation that we've been able to have within this group, and time is really running short.
Who's gonna answer or respond? Anyone?
Mariah's got her hand up then.
Okay, Mariah, Cliff, I know you had your hand up first, but Mariah may be responsive to this question.
Well, I have responses to it, but Sadaf's question was, when are we gonna talk about this? And I don't want to get too, I'm not sure what, because I can't get onto the website. I don't actually have the agenda currently in front of me to know what was even noticed. I think
Yes.
it's an important conversation. Can we talk about this now?
Yes, this has been noticed. I mean,
Okay, thank you.
we were intending for this to be that conversation.
Okay, now is the time. Okay, so I don't have a direct answer to Sadaf's question about, for example, putting a 1 in front of it, as you said, Sadaf, or other things. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the concerns that I have if we are to make it too small. One of them is that we had an override 3 years ago for PSB, which we knew at the time. We talked about having to take cuts even throughout that process, that the override was not going to be enough. And I think things broke against PSB, and we had to make cuts such as the K-5 world language that Bella referenced a couple of minutes ago. And I think the community is quite frustrated because in their mind, they say, I voted for an override and you're still cutting. And so I think that if we are to present an override that still leads to multiple cuts over the coming years, essentially the credibility of both the town and schools, because we're operating in a collaboration, the credibility is really, I mean, I think once we can say, well, there was, things that didn't break our way, twice becomes a pattern that we won't overcome. And I'm pretty concerned about that. I think that we need to be able to fully fund the schools and the town to the right level so that we can adhere to our commitments with these overrides. If not, the voters will not accept continued cuts. As they see it, they're paying increased taxes, but that's for a level of service. And to see that level of service diminished doesn't work. The other thing I would say is, we talk about ones and we compare them with communities like, I can't remember if it's Melrose. What is the community north of town that just had their vote? It was Melrose, right?
Melrose, yes.
Okay, thank you. And Melrose voted a $15 million override on a $77 million levy, which is close to a 20% increase in taxes just in that one vote alone. So a much smaller tax base, but a much larger increase. When we talk about absolute dollars as opposed to percentage, I think we're obfuscating the impact on the voters. That's not to say that there isn't a total impact that one should consider, but I think that we really need to be referencing the local context when we talk about this, and absolute dollars compared to tax levy is really important. So thinking about that percentage is important. I think those are the two big things I want to talk about as we're starting to talk about the dollar amount.
If I could too, I'm so sorry. Did I interrupt somebody?
No, go ahead. Oh,
Okay, thank you. I think too, like when we're talking about dollar amounts, I would just call attention to percent increases. In FY 24, it was 5.9%, FY 25, 4.44%. And for this year, FY 26, 4.34%, but we had to dip into reserve. And so next year, if FY 27, it's 5.68%. But if you look at in the context, it's pretty much what it costs to run the district. But at 5.68%, it assumes this running deficit that has been carried forward. And this is, I think, what speaks somewhat to what Mariah is saying, is that there are things, the district actually costs more to run than has been available to fund it. If we were able to fully fund the FY 27 request, it would resolve that running deficit. So if it were fully funded, in FY 28, we're projecting an increase of 3.8%, and then FY 29, 4.62%. So we are looking to bring it back to the lower percentages of increases. And people might ask, well, why are there increases? Every year there will be an increase, just due to expenses increasing. You've heard a lot about tuitions. DESE has allowed tuition increases anywhere from 14 to 7% to 5% on a given year, and it is a significant part of our budget. I know that you've also understood that we have looked to refine our lines and have improved on our tuition lines and expenses. We also, by comparison to other like districts, our students that are out of district and that paying tuition for, that we compare quite well. I think that there has been a lot of effort to control our cost drivers and to be as efficient as possible while focusing on diverting our monies towards students and educational program. I am advocating that it is about $6 million each year in increase to sustain that kind of programming. And if there's anything less than that, we are so tight on operations. We're not going to be able to close this by operations. We're only going to be able to close it by programming and staffing.
Cliff?
Well, a lot there. I was actually, when I first raised my hand, I was going to ask about two things. One is whether the forecast for the next 3 years all assume essentially programs in place, right? Just ask the question, is there anything new coming or assumed to be coming beyond, say, the continued rollout of like the ESL upgrade?
The literacy implementation. There are some things that we have included in the budget that are not requiring budget increases. Like we will launch a curriculum review of science and technology, but we can do that within not big increases. We will continue to do Vision of a Learner, which is ongoing, and also that's already been covered. Our expansion of literacy to grade 6 to 8 is already covered by grant funding. So we are there's no big improvements that we're asking for. if anything, in the out years, we're gonna be looking at more opportunities to reorganize ourselves to see if we can find additional efficiencies or just different way of delivering program.
Thank you. So my second question is, and maybe it's not something that you want to discuss today because you might be discussing it tomorrow night, but when you say that you could either cut staff or increase section sizes, class, how much of a change are we talking about? What would we be going to?
So I think operationally, like even at the district offices, like so many positions were reduced. We have reorganized ourselves to restore functions without adding increases to the budget. So we continue to refine that. Some of our savings have been through review of transportation. Some of the not savings, but revenues have been looking about ways we can draw in tuition. So we've been looking on the operational side to see what we can do to do better. On the program side, we're trying very much to keep what we have. The grades 6 through 8 language program, the conservatory, the music programs, the arts programs that we have in the K through 8. And then also at the high school, our programming across CTE and our arts programs, as long as our academic core. So because I said we've been working so hard on refining the operational side and the projected budget represents that, the reductions ultimately, if we're not funded as requested, the reductions will come in programming. And if programming comes with FTE reductions, so I didn't mean it's not expenses. If we cut a program, then the adults that deliver that program go with those reductions.
I'm sorry to interrupt. My question was really, what would happen to class sizes? Because you said it was one or the other. So I'm kind of
Right.
curious, what would happen to class sizes?
So we right-sized our classes. We right-sized our classes to meet guideline or school committee guidance. So reduction, since we already right-sized, when we start reducing sections, it just brings us at the top of guidance or over guidance. So we already right-sized. And sometimes you might look at a section, you'll say, hey, that's at 17, that's below guidance. But then you have to think like, okay, how many sections are there for grade 3? If you have 2 sections, all right, so if you have 3 sections of 51, you're going to get 17. But if you have 2 sections, if you get rid of a teacher, then you're going to be at 25 and 26. Like that's just how it works. So that's just to demonstrate what it means that we've already right-sized. But if we go in and we start eliminating teachers, that's what you will see.
So you'd be bringing things closer to the max. Okay, so
Or max or well over. So I just gave an
okay.
example of how that would look like.
Thank you. So I guess since other folks have started talking about the issue of size and all that type of stuff, I just want to make a few points, and I'll offer some of the thoughts that we're probably going to get from other folks, right? So I appreciate the comment about Melrose. It is interesting. I'm kind of curious as to what's going on there. At the same time, I think it is not useful to look at one particular circumstance, 1 year, because you need, as Dick's probably going to be telling us, or relatively soon, this community has increased taxes on itself substantially over the last 7, 8, 9 years, both operationally and for capital. And to just look at the marginal percentage increase of what this particular situation is and compare it is, I think, not considering the reality of what other people in town may be thinking about. I was under the impression that the elimination of world language, which by the way was what, 15, 18 years after it started, 15, something like that, years after it started, was not specifically for budgetary reasons. And I'm not sure that that has been explained well to the community, or that it was explained well back then. I think that it would be very helpful for the public schools of Brookline to be able to demonstrate to people what has changed in the FTEs in the school department from 2018, when we were at the peak of enrollment, to now, and compare the change in FTEs to the change in the student population. And to the extent that they don't match up, that's fine, because I think then you can begin to explain why it doesn't match up. But people have been raising this question. They're going to continue to raise it. And the best way to get out in front of something like this is to anticipate those questions and have the answers for folks at hand. Because I know it's certainly going to come from advisory, but beyond advisory, I know that's already, those types of questions are being asked in the community, because, you know, I'm getting notes, I'm getting messages, I'm getting copied on things that are being sent to other people. So that's just, you know, I don't have an answer as to how large this should be, or how it should be phased in, how it should be presented. I think that that is something that the committee is supposed to discuss once we get a formal request that's on the table. And then we're supposed to discuss it and make a recommendation to the select board about those issues. And I guess I just haven't seen that formal request. We certainly have it informally, but to me, this discussion is actually a little premature because we have not gotten that.
I appreciate, so you're saying that the question's out there, but it hasn't been brought forth formally, but we should anticipate, or we might as well just answer it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I look, the best offense is good defense, right? I mean,
Yeah.
these are things that and I appreciate, Bella, that you knew. So you don't have the benefit, and if it's a benefit, of having heard these conversations or these questions being asked repeatedly for a number of years. So, you know, I think it's just in the interest of the public schools of Brookline to, and Mariah, you know what's coming, to have these answers, you know, ahead of time. Anyway, the comment about, you know, where we go with an override is not directed at the schools here. It's directed both at the schools in town, and how this committee, as I understood it, not that I'm a voting member, so maybe I don't really care, is supposed to progress in its deliberations. Thank you.
Okay, so that,
Yeah, I wanted to understand, Superintendent Wong, you mentioned that there might be some opportunities over time around reorganization to gain additional efficiencies. I understand that it takes time to do that work, but I wanted to understand, I assume that those are not baked in to the numbers today, right? That's work to be done to understand. And from your perspective, and maybe this is premature and you can obviously decline to answer this question, but how substantial do you think those would be over time? In other words, we have numbers and that we understand today. It's a forecast. I understand the puts and takes of what that means. And I also know that you've been here for less than a year. It takes time to make structural changes and to resolve things that have been in place for a long time and maybe have been done in a way that is not optimal. From a cost perspective, I can't speak to the programmatic piece because that's not my area of expertise, certainly. But I'm curious what your point of view is on if you had more time, what would that look like?
Sure.
And this is getting to two different questions just to clarify what my punchline is. The first is whether we should look at a 1-year override to give you some more time. And then the second question is whether when we think about the out years, if we should be optimistic that some of those numbers from 28 and 29 would go down, or whether it's just too premature to say.
I think it's too premature to say, because without doing the analysis, I think the questions are, is it possible if we reorganize our sales and delivery program in a different way, would there be savings? But until you actually do it, I'd hesitate to make those kinds of projections. So that's why the multi-year is as everything is. Also, if there were a proposal to reorganize and offer programming in a different way, it's not just a question of dollars. It'll be a multifaceted conversation. And I think any major things like that would necessarily necessitate input from a broader range of stakeholders in the community, not just the schools. But there's some thoughts that I think sort of beg themselves to be explored, but to make any possible projection on what that would save or not is way too preliminary.
But if you had another year, for example.
I don't think so, because it probably takes the whole year. And so I'm already hearing that with this override, it's been challenging for us on the timing. So I don't think I don't think necessarily. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, so here, like every year the schools have been able to keep their increase to a certain dollar amount, but that's actually as the result of efficiencies or other reductions. So it could be this kind of modeling will help us just sort of sustain that, if that made sense.
Okay, Dick?
Thank you. I have, I think, three major points or comments. In looking at the way that the override seems to have been structured tentatively, the town has front-end loaded their entire amount, and the schools are front-end loading in the first year the catch up in the reserve or the revolving fund in year one. Year one is also the year that we are seeing a $10 million increase in the debt service from 25 million to 35 million. So essentially, a lot is being lumped in year one, as opposed to being spread over 3 years. And I would suggest that that is something that this committee ought to be thinking about as it goes forward, unless I am completely missing the issue. It seems that we don't need to necessarily build in the fund on the town side. It seems that those revolving fund / reserves could be captured or recaptured over 3 years if that's going to happen. And that way we do not have to essentially add those onto the already embedded increase that we're going to be facing in fiscal year 27. That's point number one. Um, Point number two, there are what have been identified and what this committee has already voted as some unsustainable elements, including the 83% contribution rate on the part of the employer, regardless of the nature of the healthcare plan that somebody is in. There is an impact of steps as we go forward on both the school and the town side. And it appears that those are being treated as a given. And I think one thing that this committee has to consider is whether an override should treat those as a given or should target an amount that is more reasonable going forward and essentially work toward have the parties work toward that more reasonable number. In this regard, I've asked the question, it's something that I put on the table with the document that I filed, not something that we've discussed here at any length or at all. And that is the number of educators at the high school level who are teaching less than 20 instructional periods per week. Which is what the collective bargaining agreement provides. It would be, I think, very, very helpful and instructive to see that number. And it's an issue that arose because actually a high school student pointed out to me that a lot of classes only met 4 days a week. So if you have 4 classes that meet 4 days a week, you're only teaching 16 instructional periods. And that triggered that question in my mind. If a course meets 5 times a week, then you've got your 20 instructional periods. So it would be very useful to see those numbers, to see whether there are savings that could be realized there in terms of position reductions. Finally, I would just point out that as we're looking at numbers for the override of percentages, we already have very significant embedded costs that individuals are going to be facing. With the numbers that the schools put on the table on February 12th, which I think was a 19.341 million override, or funding gap, I think was the term used then by Dr. Givens. If you added that 19.341 to the 5.31 on the town side to the costs that are already embedded, you would end up over the 3-year period with a 19.6% tax increase, virtually a 20% tax increase. And that is the total reality that individuals are going to be facing and looking at. And I think that is something that this committee and the select board, as they're setting an override amount, should be cognizant of. So thank you very much.
Janet?
So the one number that I didn't hear in Bella's presentation of what percent increase they would need over 3 years is the 2.5% that we're limited to. I'm not sure I think that's a good number. I refuse to believe that the best way to do anything is to have an engraved in stone limit. But that's the state law. And somehow we have to learn to live within those limits. I personally, when schools present their budgets from year to year, all I ever hear is, and we want more. I appreciate, Bella, you are not in a simple situation, that you are faced with costs because of whoever walks in the door as a student. that you cannot control, particularly those with special needs. But the town also has costs it cannot control. That 83% for health insurance is one. We can work to make it go away. We can work to try to change what the agreements are with town staff and school staff in regards to steps and lanes. But until we achieve those negotiations, the costs will be there and somehow they have to be paid for. So I'm not in favor of something that says we're not going to fund this level of health insurance, because then it says to me, but you're going to be cutting something else because you only have so many dollars that you can distribute, however you distribute them. On the town side, what happens is town meeting votes and decides we need new programs. And so some of the things that are in the town administrator's request reflect those. The dollars aren't there. We're going to do something extra. And there's not extra because 2.5% barely gets around. And then there's those great big things. What I will say is I see some hope going forward. Chaz has mentioned in 2030, which is the year after this 3-year period, interest costs will go down somewhat because of non-excluded debt being paid off. And that's when the cost curve, not a lot, but a little bit, starts to bend down on the pension liability. And then after that, the select board has a decision to make that says, okay, we're no longer putting $40 million a year into the pension. What do we want to do to work down the OPEB liability, but also try to relieve some of the pressure that's been on the budget because of these giant numbers that from year to year we haven't been able to do. So I am hoping that this becomes the last override, but from everything I have heard, the numbers out there, they're not going to pass the voters. And so I know it's very, very difficult to make program go away. My whole career was I was the CFO level person in nonprofits. And I'd always argue when we had to cut our budgets that you can't make a program go away, because when you make it go away, it doesn't come back. And they're not there to begin with just because. They're there because they fill a need. Nonetheless, somehow the schools are going to have to come to terms with the voters can't do it anymore. You heard what Dick said. I'm in a group of voters that are called fixed income people. And, that's sort of a misnomer because your fixed income can be a lot higher than someone at the bottom. But Social Security hasn't gone up a heck of a lot. Our health costs are going up. And it's not that we don't want to support the schools and have the best schools. It's that we can't. And so I would urge you to look as hard as you can, because if nothing passes, the result is even worse. So if you put a number out there that nobody's going to buy, and it gets voted down, it's much worse than if you can. And I have no idea what education is. It's never been my area. I can tell you what I think I demand from town government. I can tell you that once upon a time, education was reading, writing, and arithmetic. It isn't. It hasn't been for a long time. We expect so much more from our schools than educating our kids. And I don't know how you define basic education, but somehow, some way you've got to get closer to it, because 2.5% is all there is. And to continue to say, but we want, my mother used to say, your eyes are bigger than your stomach. You're asking for more to eat than you can digest. We've got to get those requests down to where the voters are going to be willing to say, okay, we understand this, and this much we can afford. So those are my 2 cents. I don't have a lot of questions for you. It's more or less, you need to hear from the rest of the community. They're just not going to do it. Thank you.
Sure.
Bella, you want to answer? Yeah, go ahead, Bella.
Is that me? Did you recognize me?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I so appreciate what you just said, and I have that in mind every day as we're building these budgets. So remember, our initial proposal was at 12.8, and we've brought it down to 8.1. And I think we can bring it down further. And yes, I haven't been here that long. So that reflects a lot of work on the new team to do that. But also we owe it to the community to be as fiscally responsible as we can be. And so some of those changes and those adjustments is reflecting our belief in that. We're also charged to bring you to support a school district that I believe the community also expects to have. The increase, when we look at that total amount that we're looking at to carry on the override is, again, those are numbers without a town allocation in year 2 and a negative allocation in year 3. So I'm not sure if there is an override number selected, if those allocation numbers stay the same. Do you understand? I'm not sure. So right now, that total multi-year number was essentially 0 and a negative number in year 2 and year 3. These are the real costs of bringing forth the district. We're not asking for big improvements, but sustaining the program that there is. And I know people often refer to the schools, but it's about the students. To Dick's question, we have taken a preliminary look. I want to make sure to double check our calculations. But when you look at the FTEs between 2018 and where we are now, you will see that while there might be an increase of FTE over what we had in 2018 for a similar population, they're likely the increases are all in student services. And there may even be a
Bella, you might want to
reduction.
specify student services, meaning special education and other sort of medical and health and
It's
mental health
it's
services, right?
beyond special education.
Yeah.
It's beyond special education. It's special education, which is mandated by law, but there's also the counselors, the other interventions, academic interventions for students that don't have a disability but are struggling to learn, and there are a lot of them. So that's also special services, student services. There are also our ELL students that also are legally mandated that we offer them services. So if you look at our staffing from 2018 to where they are now, you will see at a similar enrollment, you'll see the increases are primarily on student services, and you may even see a neutral or negative number in general education. So what I'm saying is that the cost of educating and providing sound services has increased. It has increased. And we are doing our best to be more efficient operationally and also in how we deliver that service. So we're not asking for as Chaz has said, like Cadillac services. We're asking to maintain the sound services that are in place. I know that everyone is probably fatigued about the pandemic, but the effect of the pandemic has a long tail. And so we're still seeing that in our students. Do I think it will always be there? Maybe I'm going to say it's probably another 5 or 6 years. And then we'll see some changes, and maybe it'll even be shorter than that. But at this time, we're still seeing tremendous impact on mental health and also on academic readiness. So I do believe in an override to fund the schools as they need to be is important to do so. Part of the why we're in the situation where we are in FY 26 is because I do believe the override underfunded what the schools did need, and so you're seeing that. If we are fully funded for this year, I do think that we'll be more caught up and you'll see better numbers moving forward.
Okay, Jesse?
Hi, good afternoon. Couple comments. Thank you. Number one, Cliff's point, there is no budget discussion tomorrow night at the school committee meeting, at least according to the agenda that's online. So Cliff, the next one I see is a finance capital meeting if it's docketed for March 18th. And then another school committee, next school committee after that would be March 19th, which puts us pretty
No, we
close
have one
to
on March 4th, Jesse.
March 4th.
Right. And
Yeah.
and the FY
School committee
27
meeting.
update is on the agenda for tomorrow night.
Okay.
So sorry, Jesse, to interrupt you.
Yeah, no problem. I just looked at it like a minute
Do
ago.
you
Okay.
see FY 27 budget update?
Checking.
Okay.
Yes, that wasn't the same thing. It was in the regular list from the calendar. I see it as 6B. Thank you. Okay. The next question had to be for the $6 million each year, well, that we're saying that we need, what percentage of that is just salary expenses versus about the 85% level? And 15% of that being the non-salary expenses?
Sure. It's hard for me to do that on the increases, but I think it's fair to say the budget as a whole is 85-15, and that
Right, so-
has held. Yeah,
So how much of this, I guess my question is how much of this is related to ongoing negotiations and what control do we have over that percentage of what we're asking for based on negotiations and good faith negotiations in which the union side understands the same dire, and I'll use that term, dire predicament we're in as a town plus school. Do they understand that? It's not a game. It's not a negotiation trying to get the best they can possibly get. Do they understand this is a dire circumstance and the percentage that's going to drive the deficit that we're going to face each year potentially on the school side, predominantly on FTEs lost, because that's the biggest part, is going to relate to how much the increases that come out of the negotiations are going to increase our budget for the next couple of years. So it's just a general comment, that from the negotiation side of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, PSB administration, we've continued to have ongoing conversations with union leadership so that we're all informed. And I think union leadership is informed, and they're very interested in what's happening with the budget, and they understand. And as we all understand,
yeah.
85% of the budget is salaries, 15% to expenses. That ratio hasn't shifted over time. And
Right,
as
but
I
it's the
might,
amount, I get it. I only have
Yeah.
10 minutes and then I have to get to something else. So
Sure,
I
sorry,
have to leave the
Jesse.
meeting in 10 minutes. So I understand that. In your comment about the no allocation for a town in the next couple of years, if the town's override is only what we're asking for from the town subcommittee side, as Chaz and our team worked out, 5.3 million, where else are we thinking this town allocation is going to come from? Some other fund? Because it's not going to come out of the 5.3, with additional, with 5.4 or 6 FTE loss and the loss of other town programs is barely going to keep the town running without more cuts. So where are we thinking $18 million is coming from in the next 3 years for this allocation to help hit the proposed gap in 26, 27, 28, and 29? It can't come from the town unless there's some other fund that we're not talking about. Unless you're saying that's going to come only out of this large override, unless I'm missing something.
That's how it looks like it's
Okay.
being constructed. That all of
Okay,
the
but that's not on the town side. That's an ask from the school to ask to the override, because the town's 5.3 million doesn't leave, as far as I understand, any real wiggle room for them to for the town side to suddenly allocate additional funds to the school. It would be that 19 million or so that Dick referenced is basically those 6 millions each year that we need to balance our budget.
Right, we have to keep in mind there's still a 2.5 in place. So the override isn't carrying everything entirely. There's still the existing base and income that comes from that.
Okay,
And I guess,
Mariah,
okay, yeah, I just had one final question, Bernard, and that was, again, because of something else on my schedule, I could not come here at the beginning of the meeting, so I sort of dropped in at 2:15 or 2:15 or something. Did we have a discussion, or maybe I can talk to Sadaf offhand about, offline about the final report, where we're headed with that? Because our town subcommittee is pretty much, in terms of my discussions with Janet and John Minskoyak and John Doggett separately, so as not to have any OML issues, we're sort of like on the tail end of it. And, I know schools has had its pieces and the futures has had its pieces. Where are we sitting in terms of our Bernard, with our final report construction and the timeline for landing it in front of the select board in time for public hearings and discussion?
Jesse, we can talk about it offline. We had talked
Okay,
with,
I'll call you later. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, fine. Thank you very much.
and actually,
Okay.
Before you drop Jesse, oh, okay.
I didn't drop. I just lowered my hand.
Oh, okay. All right, bye.
No, if you want to, no, I'm here.
Oh, okay. So sorry. I think before you drop, I wasn't sure if you wanted to mention what was included in the meeting materials with your email and some of the things that you had pointed out. I wasn't sure if you wanted to speak to that, but I just wanted to flag that before we lose you. If people had questions about that, I thought surfacing some of the things that you thought would be additional opportunities to cut might be useful. If you do in fact have to leave in a couple minutes, that might be worth everyone's time.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, I don't, geez, I wasn't really prepared in a sense to discuss them. I'm looking in the meeting agenda for today to see if where it is. I didn't.
That's okay. I think we can talk about it afterwards. I just wanted to call that out.
Yeah, I'll just say in general that was honestly a set of pent up frustration about where the committee's heading, how the committee's been handled, and what we really need to do in order to make something real happen now. A lot of the other things we've been talking about in the whole committee are future oriented, not really related to what the voters are going to see now. I just think we should be focusing, as I think Cliff said and Janet said, and Dick said, and I think Mariah may mention it too. So, same idea that we need to really quickly come out with a narrative that explains to the voters why we're going to be seeing these double-digit property tax increases that nobody's going to want to pay, and to prepare ourselves for the reality that it's very possible this will not pass, and that as a school committee and school district, we need to have a plan for for a no override scenario in the school budget, which I asked for 2 weeks ago, and did not see yet. Maybe it's being prepared, I don't know, but we need to prepare, for the reality, which is only like not a month away. So I can talk with you offline, maybe Sadaf, about that, and with Bernard, and find out where are we going in terms of actually landing somewhere so that we can proceed.
Well, we're gonna have part of that discussion today under report review and discussion.
I mean, your target date for getting something to the board remains the 13th. And, it's my understanding that over these next 2 weeks, constituent parts of the report will continue to come in and be reviewed by the full committee. And I think under that timeline, I know at least on the town side, the town subcommittee is meeting again next Tuesday to, try and get those last pieces of information in and hopefully make a final recommendation one way or the other. So we'll see there.
Okay, Mariah, I think you're next.
Thank you. First off, I just want to say in response to what Jesse just said, that nobody wants to pay property taxes. I do want to pay property taxes because I want to live somewhere with high quality services. So it is not a universal sentiment. And I'm sure you didn't mean it exactly like that, Jesse, but it's important.
Of course not. Of course not.
Yes.
No,
And I'm just saying though, I do want
like
to pay
paying it
property
too.
taxes.
Me too, but I'm in the same boat as Janet with fixed income.
Yeah.
So, 15 to 20% increase for 3 years. or whatever that comes to be, that is a lot of pressure on the large segment of our community that is not working.
Yes.
And so we need to be, same lingo, we need to be intentional and we need to be sensitive to that entire group. And you have a
But
lot
let
of.
me keep going on the comments
So
about
that's,
it,
I agree with
because
you. I agree with
yeah,
you.
because it goes
Obviously,
back
I
to
want
what
to.
Janet said too, because I think that like when Janet and your peer group that you referenced, Janet was in school, Proposition 2.5 didn't exist, right? That started in 1982, and at least if you were in Massachusetts, your schools were funded. Americans with Disabilities Act didn't exist. That was kicked off in 1990. Individuals IDEA, right? Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that didn't exist. That was 1975. So we have chronic underfunding of these programs that are leading us to make up the shortfall. Yesterday, just as another example, school committee was reviewing a new medication management policy that is mandated by the state, and it's a good idea, but it's an unfunded mandate, and there are costs associated with it.
Correct.
Right? So, the message of the schools want, frankly, is a very tired, outdated message. Because it's just not the reality of modern schooling when we have special education, we have health services, we have English language learners, we have so many other services that are mandated. So it's not I think you called it, Janet, we want more. It really isn't a we want more. It's that there is a minimum required to be able to provide these mandated services and still provide the type of education that I think you sort of the general education that you and your peers experienced, that's the reading, writing, arithmetic.
Mariah, I didn't mean to say that. That is how the message comes across.
I'm sharing it now because this I think is
And
an
we
anchor.
understand the need, but my concern is that I don't hear back that you understand the envelope, that we want the best town services, yes, but it has to be within what the town can afford. And
Sure.
that's the piece that all of the overrides, I mean, I have talked to seniors when this process first started, which started with a potential $300,000 line in it for senior transportation that has now been reduced to 175, who said at the time, I don't care what's in it. I can't afford it. I will vote no regardless. And that's the part I don't hear, and I try to hear, Mariah, from the school side. It's not that we don't appreciate the need, but if my electricity costs go up, then something else has to be cut for me to live within my budget. And I don't hear that. And it's not that I don't think you try, and it's not that I don't think you're, we all want the best for our kids, but I never had things that other people had when I was growing up because of the income level my parents had. That's a reality of life. And that's what I think you've heard from Cliff, you've heard from Dick, you're hearing it from me, that somehow that message we don't hear it back from the schools. That's what I meant by we want more. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, it's okay. But I think that you mentioned too about cutting program. And the reality is that programs have been cut. ECS was cut, world language was cut, right? There's cuts happening all across the district to manage this. But in your example of a certain cost going up, the reality is that there's multiple costs that are mandated. So how do you juggle against the threshold of minimum viable product for general education, mandated costs? Brookline is not the only district in this incredible financial crunch, right? I mean, there's Globe articles about this. And I think that what's a shame to me is recognizing, and I'm a sandwich generation in Brookline. I have two elderly parents, right, who live in their home as well. So recognizing the tensions that you're talking about, but also recognizing that we have obligations to cover these costs and to make sure that we are education is an obligation and figuring this out is an obligation. So I'm not sure what to say on it beyond that, other than I completely recognize what you're talking about. And there are these mandated, like, this is a mandated program. Education is mandated, special services, special education is mandated. Unfunded mandates are rife, and it's being pushed down to the school district level, and Proposition 2.5 is the, flat wall we find ourselves pinned against. So there is a real challenge here to accommodate this pressure has been building for decades, and here we are. It's a real challenge. The last thing I want to say is about Dick's comment about school periods. I would just, and the 16 and the 20, I would just remind everyone or let everyone know that this topic was discussed at least 2 sessions at the schools subcommittee. And as far as my recollection is, this committee just declined to make a recommendation on any sort of on anything relating to high school staffing model. So if we are going to talk about that, I would like to go back to the school subcommittee to discuss whether there's actually a recommendation from the subcommittee as opposed to a comment from a member. Thank you.
Okay, so after you had your hand up, and by the way, who's leading the drafting of the final report?
All the subcommittee chairs are drafting.
I thought you were for that.
All the subcommittee chairs are drafting their own reports, and we're working together to merge them.
Okay, and I hope there's one person who's sort of leading that process so that the issues of messaging can be efficiently included.
I think the issues of messaging, Bernard, I mean, we will have our own at a subcommittee level, the conclusions and the messaging that we come up with within the subcommittee. I think the point that Janet was making on messaging is a slightly different question and more about messaging from the schools themselves, which is not going to be something that the subcommittee undertakes. And Janet, you can clarify if I've misunderstood you.
No, I think you're correct. And our report is at the point where hopefully on Tuesday, we will vote our recommendations. I hope over the weekend to be able to put on paper what we've discussed and just say, this is how far we got and our recommendation is, so that we can drop those in. But as with the schools, a lot of the numbers we've received along the way haven't been public. And so it wasn't until the budget was published a week or so ago that we could get into some of the nitty gritty. But I'm hoping we're almost there. We have scheduled ourselves Tuesdays and Thursdays up until the end if needed, because we missed a meeting tomorrow because it just didn't get posted on time. So we're trying. And my intent was since the document rests with me at this point because Jesse had been away. And when it's done, it will either go to him or to John Van Scoyac, who's been filling in his chair, to hand over to you to plop in however and get the full thing done.
Yeah, I guess what I was trying to emphasize is that it's not a question of popping in different messages and different recommendations, but having maybe an executive summary, the message of the committee to the voters. And it can't be sort of broken up into different parts. I mean, it really has to be a coherent message that people can really respond to. Chaz?
Well, I think that's what has to happen in the next couple of weeks, right? Is that as you compile these statements, then you have your report, the baseline of your report is together. And then at that juncture, the committee has to say, okay, what are we recommending to the select board? And once that recommendation is set, that becomes, someone goes back and writes the executive summary, which is that document.
I guess my question was, who is that someone? I mean, is there someone, because we're really kind of running out of time, and this is a lengthy process to put something like that together. And, someone should be thinking about it right now.
Every time I pull up the outline, I identify that nobody has raised their hand to write it. So I think so far we still don't have somebody who is writing that.
Okay, so consider my comment pressure on someone to step up so we can get this done in a coherent way.
Can I go back to the question I asked earlier, which is, when will the committee get a formal set of numbers for a request in the proposed structure of an override that the town and the schools are going to present to the committee, because the committee cannot evaluate anything until that they're presented with that information. You know,
The town's-
for us,
The town's
For us-
proposal, I'm sorry,
for us to just be taking bits and pieces from different parties and assuming something doesn't work.
the town's proposal has been in since January. It hasn't changed. $5.31 million taxed in the first year in order to keep the overall ask down. That hasn't changed. Some in discussions with the committee and in discussions with the select board, some of the items have shifted in the margins, but the formal request is set. And the committee is debating, the subcommittee is debating it. So on the town side, at least, we are where we are. And we will obviously continue to work with the as the subcommittee and then the full committee ask us. You know, we will continue to work to identify what it is that the committee wants to recommend to the select board. But the town's ask is,
And the town, so
Let me restate, let me try to restate, okay? The select board is putting on the ballot something for both the town and the schools. I don't know how they're gonna structure it, but what doesn't make sense to me is to hear, well, the town's been talking to the town subcommittee and they know what we're doing. And then, you know, assume that something's gonna come from the schools in some format. And then looking to this group to determine what it is that you're really asking in terms of putting them together and having us evaluate that. Because that's what I understand we're supposed to be doing. Because if that's not what we're supposed to be doing, and you want us to take what you've just said, Chaz, which is that, okay, you're done. And then we're going to take with the schools, kind of maybe go over tomorrow night, and we're going to assume, okay, they're done. Then we're going to sit down by ourselves and talk about it. If that's what the proposed approach is, that's fine. But I don't think anyone around here sort of knows what it is that you expect us to be doing.
So Cliff, if I could just say on the town side, because that's the only part I've been involved in, we are now discussing, and hopefully we've been talking with the town staff about the structure of the override, about do you need it all in 1 year, about what would it look like to take some pieces and spread them out beyond what Chaz has proposed. So my understanding as a subcommittee is we're supposed to be doing that deeper dive, which we're doing now, and then bringing our recommendations back to this group. But we haven't gotten to that point yet. And that's been a problem I think we've all faced from the beginning, that our deadlines, our timeline doesn't fit the problem. There is nothing, and what's available on the subcommittee website, the drafts that have been produced so far only go up to here's the issues. We're still discussing what we think should be done with those. Do we think we can lower the 5.31? Do we think it can be spread over 3 years? All of those questions we're still talking about. So it's hard to bring it to the whole group if you're asking for us to have a recommendation.
So I think
I'm not asking for you to have a recommendation. That's the problem.
So Cliff,
It's-
Chaz has been consistent with his number and the work that they were able to do. The school number has shifted, and I do want to say how much I appreciate all the comments that have been made, and that I also hope you know that we have the school, on behalf of the school department, that we've heard you and we've been doing our best to shave our costs, and we're we'll have an improved number tomorrow, but it's not gonna make the request a whole lot smaller. It'll make it smaller. But we have been endeavoring to be responsive and to shave as much operationally to be efficient, in order to put the programs at the forefront. So I think tomorrow's probably going to be the best closest number to the final number, and then I'll talk to Mariah and Jesse about what you're asking for, Cliff, and of course with Chaz as well.
And just to close the loop on that, no, Cliff, I don't expect us to just drop numbers in your lap and then walk away. Because to your point, right, this is not just the town and just the schools. This is an override. And so what is a potential override? And what does that look like? What does that structure look like? And so, we want to continue to have that conversation. The subcommittee effort is to try and, do some of that pressure testing, do some of the, answer some of the questions that Janet raised, and then to bring that to the full committee where those questions can be again answered. If there are additional questions from committee members, those can be answered, and then it can be considered in the context of the schools ask. That all of this can be considered as one holistic question, to think about. All right, these are the needs. We've figured we've analyzed them. We think that this is this is our opinion on them, and this is how, if you were to put a question on the ballot, this is how we would recommend you do it. And that requires us to stay engaged with this process. So it's not, I don't view this as trying to drop something in your lap and say, take it or leave it. No, I want to continue supporting the committee's work and answering the committee's questions. So I'm not at all saying that we're trying to,
So I think it would be helpful just to talk about the process, because within our subcommittee, our focus, we had talked about discussing the override and the structure in more detail within our subcommittee. We obviously have talked about the financials, and what we had understood was that we would have that conversation more broadly within the broader committee. So if that's not the approach, then I think we need to shift how we're doing it, and then we have to converge at the end, which actually means we need more time to have that conversation together. I think regardless of how we approach it, and I'll get back to that in 1 second, I think this committee will need to meet probably twice a week for the next couple of weeks to get this over the line realistically. It's 3/27. We haven't covered any of the documents that we have to review. We haven't reviewed the town report. We haven't reviewed the school report, and that will take time as well. So I guess Nicole, if you're still, is Nicole on the line still? Nicole, yes. Thank you. Yeah. Nicole, I would propose that we meet twice a week for the next couple of weeks, because I think we will need to do that before the 13th, which is just, I think, 2 weeks out. So that's one thing. Do people disagree with that? And then I have a second point to make.
I think we need to do it. I just pulled up my calendar to see when.
Yeah, so I think Nicole will send out, Nicole, if you can send out a doodle poll, as long as people agree that we need to do it, I think, we try to see what time works for people.
If I can just throw out, I would think Monday, Wednesday would be better than Wednesday, Friday. And again, it depends on time of day, but 9 a.m. Tuesday, Thursdays, the town subcommittee has blocked out as times that they'll be meeting.
Okay, so that's fine. So I'm gonna let Nicole put out a doodle poll and figure that out. Again, as long as nobody has a disagreement that we should meet a couple times a week. And I think we can cancel it if we need to cancel it.
That's how we set ours is, get it on the table. We can always make it go away.
All right, thank you. So the second question just is around process. So I think, Cliff, to your point, and Janet, your point around the pressure testing that you're doing within the town subcommittee, because this does need to come together more holistically, I think it is helpful to have this conversation with the full committee. We can continue to ask questions on the subcommittee. People should chime in and tell me if they disagree with this, but I do think thinking about how this comes together in a way that the voters will actually see it is important and warrants that discussion and additional time on the agenda. So I propose we add that to the agenda for the coming weeks, and we'll have to chip away at it, although we have other things that I know we need to cover in the meeting as well. I have questions, for example, and I had mentioned this earlier, around if the number is 25 million, which everything is telling me that it's still 25 million, if it makes more sense to go back to a discussion around tiers, because if we're talking about cutting things like music programs or language programs, I would rather give voters an opportunity to say that we'll cut one of those versus being in an all or nothing scenario. That's my gut instinct, but I would like to have a conversation about that. I'm also concerned about being in a district that doesn't have robust language programs, right? To me, that's not a nice to have, right? Janet, to your earlier point, basic language education that starts in middle school is basically standard and all but failing districts that I'm familiar with in the United States. I think that is a discussion that we might want to have. I would like to think about how voters will see that information and what that will look like. And that just requires us to also see the no override scenarios, which I know will be presented tomorrow at school committee. So to date, we're still missing some of the pieces to that particular puzzle. So I suggest at the next meeting, whenever we can get it, early next week, considering all the OML requirements that we have, that we put that on the agenda around how we assemble it. I know that the 1 year override, Superintendent Wong mentioned that she was not necessarily in support of that doesn't necessarily solve problems on the school side. I know it was a question that was raised in this committee. To the extent that we want to continue to discuss that, we should discuss it. I'm not advocating for it. I'm just surfacing it as something that has been discussed that I want to make sure we've discussed sufficiently for this group to feel comfortable. And then, the third bucket is there was a list of things that I thought was interesting in the email that Jesse sent out. And Janet, maybe this is something that the town subcommittee will bring to the table to talk about. Were there additional opportunities for cuts across the board? And I think we want to pressure test this further based on the information that we have within the subcommittees, and then bring that next week to the full committee meeting. So that's maybe 3 agenda items that I've added. Nicole, I don't know if you got all those, but I'd love to add those to the list, and maybe it's just an umbrella discussion around.
If I can
Sure.
If I can respond to Sadaf real briefly, one of the things that I want to do is take the town's proposal and break it down into contractual obligation, loss of potential revenue, for example, with sustainability that Jesse mentioned, replacing contract services, so getting more bang for the buck. I was going to try and make those buckets so that it would be easier for us to digest and see if there's a way to reduce that first year number, although I'm not a fan of a 1 year override, because there's so much of it is front loaded, and because if you make cuts in year 1, you're not going to bring them back in year 2, and we don't want to go back to the voters in year 2. I just think, it's rip the Band-Aid off and see what happens. I think that's the point we're on, all the way around. And Dick has his hand up. Sorry, Dick, didn't mean to jump ahead of you.
Dick? Dick, are you muted?
I am now unmuted. Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on the comment of the number of educators and instructional periods. The school subcommittee looked at teaching load in terms of broad contractual or provisions relative to other school districts, and we looked at the number of students that teachers had, but we did not actually address this question of the actual conformity of the teaching loads in terms of instructional periods of the various 9 to 12 educators to the contractual terms. And that is an issue. I'm happy to have it discussed in the first instance by the school subcommittee. or to have it discussed here, but I think it is an important question that we have not yet addressed on the school subcommittee. And if every 9 to 12 educator is teaching 20 instructional periods, that's fine. If that's not the case, then there could well be opportunities for some savings there. So
We did discuss this though, Dick. We talked about 4+1, and we talked about the fact that the student load for the 4 courses, we talked about the 115 student cap, and we talked about how that would exceed the cap if we went to the different model. And that we talked about, we did, that's all in the report that we reviewed.
we never looked at the number of instructional periods that each 9 to 12 teacher was teaching. That's my point. And I think it's an important issue. Happy to have it addressed here. I think probably it should be addressed at the school subcommittee first. Happy to do that.
So I agree. Let's put it on the agenda for the school subcommittee on Monday.
Thank you.
And I think it's worth a deeper conversation because we did review teaching loads, but we didn't have a recommendation that came out of that, or I think that's it. We didn't have a recommendation that came out of that. I also wanted to just comment, and I started to say this earlier before we started talking about how the report was being compiled, but from what I've seen, the schools have made updates to costs and have taken a look at right sizing, and those are short term. Those are things that are viable in the short term, and I commend the schools for taking a hard look at that. And it's a really important step, and I hope that that does increase confidence in the work that the schools have done. And also there are a number of things that the subcommittee has identified that will take a little bit more time, right? Those things are not in year, as Jesse mentioned before he dropped, but they could be within the 3-year time horizon. And that's what I think we want to, maybe we resurface that and talk about how we want to maybe bring those to bear on the actual override recommendation within our subcommittee, and then bring it back to this group. Because there's been some really good work that has been done there and some good thinking. And it's not easy. I think we're at the point where the low-hanging fruit is, has been taken. And other opportunities will be structural or will be more complex. And that's, I think, to be expected. But I think there's still opportunity there.
I saw a hand go up. Is that Ruth Ellen? No, apparently not. Okay, this has been a long discussion, very important discussion. But we still have a number of other items on our agenda. And we should probably make a decision as to which ones must be discussed today, and which ones we can defer to a later meeting.
There are a couple of those items, Bernard, that actually didn't make it for this time. So the BEEP analysis is going to have to be moved to next time, and so is forecasts. The edits just didn't make it in time, unfortunately. And then the building piece was actually consolidated with the town school financial model, so that actually cuts a few things off the agenda. I guess I would like to try to just start from the beginning and keep going and see as far as we get. Before people have to drop, but I'm happy to keep going to just make sure we progress the work.
I'm just wondering if we should start backwards. John Van Scoyac put forth something that I think would have been helpful from the select board before we started, which is a framework for how much of an override should be put before the voters in percentage terms. And Dick also had some items on that. And given our last discussion, would that help us frame going forward? If not, continue with the agenda.
Okay, an alternative approach is to not get all the updates and get into the override proposals and the report review and discussion, which seem to be maybe more important. for us to accomplish today, since we're not gonna get through the whole agenda. In my opinion, it's 340. Anyone have
Yeah,
it?
that's right. It's 340.
So I'm okay with either approach. I think we need 2 meetings next week, and if we have 2 meetings next week, then I'm okay deferring some of these items. But the reality is we have to start pulling this report together, and to the extent that we defer the items that need to be discussed and voted on, that it delays our report.
Right.
I am with you 100%, Sadaf. I've been trying to get us to vote, but we keep talking. So does that mean that we're going to either Dick's impact statement or John Van Scoyak's proposal of how to set limits on override amounts?
I think that's fine. I'm happy to start there.
Yeah, that's item 6 on the agenda. What I'd like to make sure that happens is that all of the updates, reports be available in our packet for the next meeting, so that we can come, you know, with having read and having concise comments or questions. Okay, moving right along. Discuss override proposals. If ready, what does that mean? And who's ready for that discussion?
That was the discussion we just had. I think it ended up showing up twice, accidentally.
I'm not sure if John is with us. His mic is off, his picture is off. And I couldn't do what he submitted to at first to town subcommittee. I don't have it in front of me and couldn't do it from memory.
I'm here,
Here comes John. Okay.
but I'm here, but I'm on a walk.
Oh,
I confess I scanned the agenda to see if something that I requested be shared with this committee was in it, and maybe I missed it, but I'm not sure I saw it, linked to the agenda. Can someone just give me, give me the information as to whether everybody has access to what I had shared with the town subcommittee?
Okay, can you do that, Janet?
I don't have it in front of me, and every time I try to do something like that, I leave the meeting. So maybe Nicole can, it was on the, it was in the packet, if Nicole can put it up.
Oh, okay. So it was in the packet.
It was in the packet, as was
Yeah.
Dick's.
Okay. Well, while Nicole is, trying to get that up for people to read, I will just go ahead and say I urge people. It's not very long, so don't be afraid. It's a short 1-page proposal, and frankly, it's a departure from many of the things that have been discussed at this meeting, insofar as, rather than getting into the nitty gritty of what should be in an override proposal, in terms of detailed, this program or that program, this much schools or that much town. It's a framework for how do we right size an override question, not just in FY27, but in any future year where we will, come to the conclusion that some kind of override is called for. How do we right size the ask in terms of what we say are the root causes of the need for overrides? And if the root causes are the parts of budgets, both town and school, that are growing well in excess of inflation, and I specifically, narrowed that down to the pensions and health coverage questions, which have been, in the current projection would be going up at around 10%. Whereas most of the operational costs, just in terms of salary costs and utility costs and materials costs, those are going up, somewhere around 3 to 4%. Of course, neither of those numbers is 2.5%. So if we were to, first of all, agree that there are going to be times, and they might even be every 3 years, when we're going to need more than 2.5% plus new growth, then what do we set as kind of the reasonable expectation or ceiling on how much of a percentage we're aiming at in terms of operational costs, purely operational costs, and how do we accommodate that? And at the same time accommodate these over and above 4%, let's say the pensions and the group health costs that are growing at 10%. And it would be instructive for voters to kind of learn that the override ask is based on the difference between a 2.5% increase in group health and in pensions and the actual increase, which is like 10. And those are fixed costs. So we have to close those gaps. But then we have a certain amount of flexibility in terms of the gaps between 2.5% and our ongoing operational cost increases. And how do we meet the taxpayer halfway by saying it's too much to ask that we're going to put into the override both the gap in fixed costs and the normal day-to-day no changes in operations gap in our operational costs. So let's decide what needs to be the ceiling in terms of what would be actually approved by voters. And then how do we tailor operations to what will be a lower than ongoing, continuing increasing costs of operations, but not as low as 2.5%. It might land at, more like 3% on a regular basis. And so is that the number we should set as a ceiling? And I've summed it up as best I can. So if anybody has any questions, I suppose, go ahead.
I just have a question for Charlie, who put it up. You're only going down to D, which is what towns, there, I don't know if you got John's, what was published is his more complete proposal, which included.
Nicole should have that. I did send
Thanks,
the
Janet.
update.
I will swap that out. I just had it on my desktop.
Yeah, no, that's what I thought, and I just wanted to point it out.
Yeah, E is kind of important.
E is important. That's where we left off at town.
Yeah, we've teased everybody, but we'll show them E in a minute. And since I'm looking at this on a very small screen, does somebody want to read E aloud?
I can, provided that in no event shall the allowable override amount as in D cause the total tax levy exclusive of new growth to exceed 5% in any year. This 5% figure in E is subject to refinement based on analysis of future needs and likely voter acceptance considerations. And Cliff's hand is up.
But go ahead.
Yeah. So I guess my question really is, how do you make this happen and enforce it and, get future select boards, school committees, whomever, to really pay attention to it?
Are you asking me?
Well, maybe it's a rhetorical question, but do you want to try to answer? Sure.
Well, I don't know, maybe I'd be better off leaving it as rhetorical. Maybe you don't. I mean, maybe this works for, a year, 5 years, and then some future select board and school committee say this is too restrictive and we need to, return to taking our chances with something more than this. Frankly, I've asked, the administrative staff on the town side to check my numbers and by all means, work out what they think is the right kind of number, sort of cap number to put on this framework based on, checking of the numbers as to what we are actually experiencing in terms of operating cost increases, what we are actually experiencing on the school side and on the town side. And then the work that people like Dick Benka have done on what we are actually imposing with the recent property tax increases that have already been put in place for the last couple of years. And what do we think is the number based on the sort of degree of tax tolerance And this is kind of a guessing game, but it's an important one because if you guess wrong, then you just get a flat out rejection, of an override question. Whereas if you guess right, you might get, $15 million. You might not get $25 million, but you might get $15 million. But it helps to be able to explain to taxpayers and voters the reason that we're asking for this number, let's say it's $15 million, is that, we looked at the fixed costs, and in order to meet the increase in fixed costs, we have that in the 15 million. And then we've got a little bit more that will help our town and school sides make operational changes to dial back the ongoing increases in their operating costs. But we've given them enough to kind of, I think, we think sustain an acceptable level of operations, but not the level of operations that they were hoping to get with the 25 million that, was one of the numbers under discussion early on.
Cliff, did you have your hand up?
My hand is up.
Oh, okay, Mariah, go ahead.
I still can't get access to the town website, so is there, thinking about John's proposal and agreeing completely with Cliff's point about not being able to bind any future committees, what is the year at which we're not playing catch up anymore on pension obligations?
31.
So that's within kicking distance at this point. And provides a relief valve for the overall budget, right? So is there some sort of commitment that can be, at least like pledged, maybe not in blood, but in intention, about not doing these things through 31 or adhering to this through 31 with the idea that 31 would give us greater flexibility given the reduction of those obligations.
So
That requires,
I'll say something about that real quick, and I defer to others to answer. But I do want to say, when I hear this prospect raised, of there's going to be this year, 2030, presumably, where we suddenly get a huge break because we have now paid off the pension unfunded liability. And what I think is being left out is, I don't know what the number is as to how much of the pension liability that we are carrying at that point then just becomes the OPEB, the health coverage payoff. Because if it's more or less the same as what we were doing to cut down on the unfunded pension liability, I don't really see that there's going to be this day of future relief down the road, but maybe I'm wrong.
Okay, Chaz.
Cliff has his hand up.
Chaz?
Just moving, yeah, right.
I was just gonna, since the future group sort of like did something on this, I just thought I'd share it. So the select board in September did pass a vote of policy about what to do with the pension funds once 2030 goes by, and that is to direct it to the OPEB liability. And that is actually a continuation of the policy that's been in existence for a while. What the future group did look at and sort of vote was a recommendation that the select board put together some sort of a study group, which over the next 3 years would kind of look at things with the caveat that whatever, if anything, did occur or could change, it would have to be done only if there was sort of everyone agreed that it would not be impacting the rating, the AAA rating. And so it's unclear whether or not, given the growth in OPEBs, the OPEB liability, we would ever get to a point where people would be comfortable diverting some, or, yeah, because it wouldn't be all of it, some of that money, but that is the recommendation that at least it be actively looked at.
So-
Okay,
That was,
and
I hit that when I was lowering my hand.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say what Cliff said, we voted on as a whole group as well. And I added to it that there needs to be flexibility in what the select board decides. But that also keep in mind that if the number is $40 million, you don't want to at any point reach a cliff where everything is paid off and the $40 million is suddenly available, because that, it's titration was my suggestion, but the whole committee has voted that the select board set up a review committee to review that decision, rather than just go from one mandate to another that leaves us no flexibility in dealing with increasing operating issues.
okay,
The OPEB funding, though, isn't a mandate, right, Janet? Am I recalling correctly?
The
It's a good-
OPEB is
it's good
not,
practice.
but it's a voluntary payment that the town has made, that the select board right now has a policy to more or less make a mandate of town policy. And we all voted last week, I think, to say, take another look at that. And don't lock us into something else that's just as onerous as this had turned out to be, given that we can't live within 2.5% very easily and are exceeding it by huge amounts sometimes.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Nora. Okay, Dick?
Yeah, very quickly. The benefits are identified as a fixed cost. I would just note that they are not fixed in the sense that the 83% is an issue that is subject to negotiation in collective bargaining. What the GIC charges us for each plan may well be outside of our control, or is outside of our control, but the portion of that the town and schools have to pay and to divert from other operations costs is not fixed.
Okay.
It's John again. May I just add that Dick and I had a discussion of this not too many minutes ago. And, as I see it, one of the virtues of this framework that I have proposed is that if taxpayers come to understand that the major reason that they are being asked for something more than 2.5 plus is these things called, healthcare coverage that grow at 10% and unfunded pension go at 10%, eventually they might say, well, isn't there something you can do to, pull that back a little from the 10% inflation that it's been undergoing in terms of healthcare coverage? And then that's when we get into a serious discussion of the split, I think. And we might actually be able to achieve a little progress in bringing down that split more in the town's favor in terms of negotiations. But first, people have to kind of, make the connection that the reason we are coming back to them for these extra monies has mostly to do with the agreements in place and have been in place for years in terms of pension payments and health coverage for retirees.
Cliff?
Yeah, I guess, John, why isn't that conversation and dissemination of information already happening? Why isn't the select board going through an education process with the public on the issues when they're putting things on the ballot? I mean, that would strike me as something that, should be done no matter what.
Well, that's what I'm trying to, it did not happen in the last override, and we tend to do overrides the same. when we get to the next one, it's kind of like the last one, we come up with a list of things that would have to be cut if the override isn't approved. But nothing in the override question says the real reason we need all this money isn't because of these programs that are on the cut list, because most of them are only growing at about 4% increase in cost a year. The real reason is we've got these fixed costs. I'm going to call them fixed, even though Dick has a good point, that are growing at the rate now of 10% a year. So
I'll just say,
I just think that's messaging in education,
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
select-
I don't know that you need to change this policy, right?
I will say it's part of the budget 101 tomorrow,
Yeah.
online, Thursday. Come on out. It is a part of that discussion. And then at the Baker School next week, looking forward to having that discussion. It's one of the many things we're trying to talk about in terms of how we got here and what can be done as a practical matter.
If I may ask Chaz or Charlie Young or someone else, can anyone right now enlighten us as to the size of the unfunded pension liability currently and the size of the OPEB liability currently?
Bacon?
Yes, just give me a moment. I should just have it always on this phone. Just one moment.
It's in the town report. I remember one at 177 million. I don't remember which is which. I don't remember both of them. I just remember one number of 177 million. I think that's the pension.
That's old though. That's a couple of years old because.
No, I got updated information from Melissa before it went into the report. So those are the numbers she gave me.
So we're on a 2-year funding cycle for pensions. So we'll get our next actuarial valuation sometime in the next 6 months for our system as of January 1, 2026. So the old report is still relevant. The unfunded liability in that report is 169.7.
Is that the OPEB or the?
That is for pensions.
And does anyone have OPEB?
OPEBs is around 170.
Yep.
Well, there you go.
And so that's as of January 1st, 2024, right?
Yeah, net OPEB 189. But it needs to be updated.
And we're not paying it down, right? I mean, that is growing, right? OPEB.
So in the last two actuarial valuations for OPEB, the unfunded liability, according to the actuaries, is around $20 million, approximately $20 million annually.
It's growing at that rate.
Correct.
Right. And I persisted in asking this question because I think, it gets back to this notion of what happens in 2030. And we're talking about an unfunded OPEB liability that's going to be as big or bigger than the current unfunded pension liability.
How much do we pay annually towards that liability? 20 million plus any extra that we're paying down.
So
Our fiscal 27 appropriation for OPEBs is just under $5 million.
Yeah, 4.9.
Okay.
And again, we're proposing holding that flat in order to get the override number down.
Well, Chaz, one last point. We had been on a path, and it was a modest path, of adding an additional $250,000 a year to that, right? And we decided we can't afford that this year.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And the committee didn't recommend that we not fund OPEBs. The committee recommended that the select board look at and have maybe a different policy that leaves for some flexibility. Call together a group to study that, but not make it another hard and fast, we're going to do it by this date, which takes a huge bite out of the ability of both town and schools to function with costs that are exceeding what comes to them through 2.5. So that was the recommendation. I added, please be flexible. But yeah, just take another look and we all agree that the rating agencies need to agree with our approach so that we don't lose the bond rating.
So I know we're over time. I realize also that I misspoke, and Dick's document is actually under the override capacity heading. So that was my mistake. I got confused about the headings. I'm not sure if we wanted to stay for a little bit longer and talk about that or the town school financial model document. I'm not sure what people's availability is or not.
Yeah, okay, what do people think? I mean, I think that the discussion of Dick's size of the override and capacity to pay document is a long discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is Ruth Ellen, and I've got to leave this meeting within 5 to 10 minutes.
The superintendent also had to go, and I'll also have to go.
Yeah.
These are not short topics.
Yeah.
No.
I would just say, given your timeline, given where you are, I would maybe think about trying to Sadaf's point, having 2 meetings next week, trying to think about moving material, having those questions. Because I think what's most beneficial for us in terms of being able to be responsive to the things that you need is feedback on the proposed numbers and structure of an override. And Cliff, I understand your concern, which is, have we gotten that ask yet? But whatever you can do to sort of clear the deck in terms of the other things that you want to discuss, like the town school model, like other recommendations coming out of the committees that are not related to that question, because then that tees you up pretty squarely to have that discussion, which I think Dick's memo feeds directly into, which is what is the size of an override the voters are willing to accept? Because that's ultimately what we're going to have to build around. We're advocating, we're advocating for where our needs are. On the town side, I tried very hard to explain throughout the beginning of this process how, if this were truly, everything that everyone wanted, the town number would be closer to $10 million, $12 million. But we're already making, when we talk about tiers and so forth, like the town has already laid those tiers out and cut the top tiers off. So now we're down to 5.31, but I am cognizant of the political realities of asking for a question that's a high number. So we need direction from this committee on where to go. I don't think it's unreasonable for the town or the schools to be laying out what they think they need to do the job that's been asked of them. And then we need your feedback on how to make that work, with the voters, because 100% of zero is still zero. And we gotta figure out how to get to a point where you're comfortable from the capacity to pay standpoint and all the other standpoints that what we're asking is reasonable and can be presented to the voters in a realistic way. And we have to be comfortable. We have to be comfortable and clear to you about what that number then needs in terms of what we can and can't do for the community.
Okay, Mariah?
I just have a question. Apologies if I've missed this. Has there been conversation either at the select board level or within this committee about whether the town ask is too small? For example, Janet brought up the point earlier of 300,000 for senior center was subsequently reduced to 175. I know that I think you have some cuts to roads that are within the cuts you're making.
There's a difference between what Chaz presented in December, which was that tiered thing, and where he's wound up. And within that 5.3, some of the numbers have changed. Those are the discussions that we started, and I will resume. But basically, it's a reflection of the town trying to live within its perception of political reality. And that's why I think if I dice the numbers into, well, this is a contract obligation, this is potentially lost recoupment of costs if we lose solar, those kinds of things, that might be easier for us to look at. But we're in the middle of that now. I don't know that the committee is going to say, let's raise the number from 5.3, which then gets you to where the advisory committee always is. We think there should be more money over here, but we don't know where to take it from. And so we can make some comments around the edges as to things that need to be looked at, especially roads. We did not get the additional hard data because we lost the town because they had to put out a budget book, and then we lost Erin because she had to deal with a storm. So I think we're just gonna, unless it shows up on Tuesday, we're just gonna go over it. But I can't see us adding. That's my personal opinion. It hasn't been voted. We
So you
have.
are, okay, it's helpful to know that it's on, that's being talked about. Exactly,
We're
like, is the cut
talking-
too deep? Okay.
Yeah, we're talking about that. I certainly always raise the issue of senior transportation. I'm comfortable with the response that I got. But the committee has never felt that they've reached a point that they're ready to vote one thing or another, which is why nothing has been presented to the larger group. We're still talking about it.
Thank you. I have to go join a work meeting, so I'm
Okay,
sorry.
so
I'm 10 minutes
unless-
late, so I'm gonna
Yeah.
leave. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariah.
Thanks,
Unless
Mariah.
any specific things I want to talk about, I'd like to end this meeting.
Yeah, I've got to go. Sorry.
Bye. Okay, seeing that no one raising their hand with things they want to discuss further, meeting will end. Thank you, everyone.
Sure.
Thank you.
Pardon?
Thank you.